have a way to back it up just in case. Oh, I think I'm recording already, so that's okay.
Okay.
Well, welcome everybody to the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program's Emerging Species series. We were inspired by the Lower Hudson Prism, who also had a really amazing emerging species series this spring, with where I met Joyce and I learned from her about these invasive jumping worms. And they are a species that is not yet widespread in the Adirondack Prism region. I'll talk about what our regions are and what prisms are in just a moment. And it's really just so key and important for the public to understand what the species is, how it acts, how to identify it, ecosystem impacts, and ways to prevent the spread. These worms don't travel around on their own like many invasive species that come up to the Adirondacks and travel around North America. They travel along many different pathways that all have to do with people. So if it is a seed or an egg in the mud caked on your hiking boot, to gardening soil, to using live bait, and inadvertently, thank you, Jeff, thank you. Oh, just having some power people help me. Okay, sorry, thank you. Thank you all for rolling with the punches. 2020 just keeps amping up. So if we know about these species, we can prevent their spread in all of our activities, especially when we're recreating in places that we love and hold dear because of their natural beauty or ecosystem values or quality of, having a high biodiversity of native plants and animals. And so when we bring these species inadvertently through our activities, we can seriously threaten the things we love and hold dear, but are also of economic importance to our region in terms of tourism or fishing or hiking and recreation. So a little bit about the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program. We're one of 8 prisms around New York State. Our prism is our territory. So every prism has a different territory. Joyce is from the Lower Hudson, the Dutchess County area, and so she typically works with the Lower Hudson Prism. There's a prism for all of Long Island and the city, for the Albany area, for different chunks of Western New York, for the St. Lawrence River, and then we cover everything from pretty much above Albany, everything within the Adirondack Blue Line, all 6 million acres of Adirondack Park, which is no easy task. So that's why we also rely on building up and training volunteers like yourselves to understand what's out in the parks, because we're only 4 people and we can't find it all by ourselves. So we cover all of the Blue Line, including over to Lake Champlain and then up to the Canadian border. So it's just a small chunk of land that we're responsible for stewarding. And so that's why we have so many educational opportunities. So I'm excited you're all here today and how popular this event is. If you are, and some of the follow-up, when I can email you all, I'll be sending out all the slides I have that show our prism area, that talk about, how to, our goals and how we achieve those goals, but I'll also be able to connect you with links to finding your local prism if you happen to be zooming in from, say, Buffalo or Poughkeepsie or Brooklyn, because we have excellent partners that do work throughout the state. All right, so next on my list was to just discuss the agenda, and then I'm gonna fizzle into the background and let Joyce take it away. But personally, I like to let people know where we're going. So we're getting through introductions and introducing our wacky situation. We're gonna jump right into jumping worms after this. So biology and identification factors, their ecosystem impacts, where to find them and how to find them, and then prevention methods. So as I mentioned, it really is up to us in order to keep these worms from spreading. Part 2 of Joyce's talk goes into citizen science. So how can we activate you all now that you know what these invertebrates are and how to find them and their impacts, how can you help your local PRISM map the location? So where are they not? It's very, very key to know both of those points of data in order to either rapidly respond and control their spread, or to understand where we're doing well or what corridors they're not following. So having a null data point is just as important sometimes as having a location. And then we're going to jump into Q&A. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Joyce, and I'll be monitoring the chat box in case you all have questions. Because we have so many people in the room today, I think it might be best if for everyone to stay on mute. And so if you type your questions up in the chat box, that's also something I can extract later and help answer your questions if it wasn't answered today. So I'm going to go on mute, Joyce, and you can go ahead.
Thanks, and congratulations on having electricity. It's making a little halo behind your head, so this is good.
That's good.
Good morning, everybody. I am from Cornell Cooperative Extension, Dutchess County. In CCE Dutchess, I'm responsible for what's called community horticulture. Colleagues have commercial, which is greenhouses and things like Christmas tree farms. My other colleague is agriculture, so she has crops and livestock. And we also have a colleague who runs a Taste New York Todd Hill store, where we have all locally produced products in what was an abandoned gas station in the middle of the Taconic. So we're small, but we're ambitious. I'm part of, we are partners of, as Emily said, the Lower Hudson PRISM, and they sponsored us to go out with education about 3 things of invasive pests of high concern. And so I've been teaching regionally about spotted lanternfly, about beech leaf disease, and jumping worms. So today we're talking about jumping worms. And if I click on this there, now my screen is active. If we have a moment at the end of this time, I'm going to do a little bit about Amynthas because of jumping worm, or excuse me, because of spotted lanternfly, and encourage you while you're out and about to also map absence and presence of tree of heaven. So the idea of this is that we've got professionals, we've got the DEC, we have other people, ag and markets, that are reacting to when these pests are found, but there's a limited number of people. With spotted lanternfly in the Lower Hudson PRISM, we also have detective dogs that can, through scent, have been trained to seek out spotted lanternfly. So when one is found, they can see if there's more. When there's in quarantines, they can look around at trucks, and they've been really successful, but that's a limited number. So what we've been doing is urging people that are already out and about. You might be hiking or fishing or bicycling or gardening, to keep your eye out for these specific things and be boots on the ground. So the citizen science is to help map through data points with IMapInvasives, which I'll show you at the end, where you do or do not see species of special concern. And it may be that if you're, excuse me, involved in APIP, that there are other things that are of special concern in your region, but this concept of having people that are already outdoors to help is what we are advocating, and that's why we're teaching today about jumping worms. So aren't all worms good? I mean, what's the problem with jumping worms? We know that worms, if you study soil, if you study gardening, you know that worms are important in our soil. You know that they help mix the soil. You know that they help make air pockets, which our roots need. They need water, they need air, they need the minerals to get the nutrients into the soil solulate, and to bring them up to their leaves and down to their roots. We know that when we've got better heads better structure of the soil. We know that it helps drainage as well as holding water. We know that these things are good. And even Darwin said so. Darwin was, he in the, what is this, 1881, one of his later works, he studied worms a lot. He studied the European earthworm, and he changed people's perception from it being an ugly, disgusting thing to describing how earthworms help our soil. However, earthworms in our ecosystem are 3 types. And this describes the 3 types. Epigeic, which is at the top layer of the woods or of our soil. Anisic, which is a behavior. These worms go down, they dig very deep burrows, they go down where it's cool, they can avoid the heat. And then there are worms which are endogeic, and these tend to be sort of in that middle layer. The worms that we have, the European earthworms, are anisic. So these, they come up when it's cool in spring. They come up when it's cool in fall. They stay down in their burrows. Oops, go away. They stay down in their burrows when it's really warm because they want the cool, okay? The jumping worms that we're gonna be talking about today, the most common are Amynthas agrestis, Amynthas tokionensis, and Metaphyre hilgendorfi. They are epigeic in that they are at the top layer, but some of them aren't small. And you're going to see that their size and their position is going to be key in identifying them. Their size and their position is also key in understanding the damage that they do to the soil, to the woodlands, and to our environment where they're starting to spread, okay? There are multiple different names for jumping worms. They're called snake worms and Alabama jumpers, but the two Amynthas and the Metaphyre are the ones that are most common here. And as I've started learning about them, I found to my surprise, when we looked, we had 2 of them, and often all 3 can coexist. They can coexist with the European earthworms, the lumbricus, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right today. We're not sure how much they're competing. They may be competing with that European earthworm also. So how did we get involved? Here at Cornell, Dutchess County, I run a hotline, I answer questions. That's why the phone's turned off, because I'm getting like 10, 15 questions a day. It's a cicada killer wasp. It's not a killer hornet, Asian hornet killer. But a homeowner came in, and they came in with a turf sample. And I have to admit that I'm not very interested in turf. I mowed my meadow for a while, and now it kind of looks like a lawn. But he was very upset. He brought in the turf sample and said, my lawnmower is bottoming out. And I thought, I don't understand what you're talking about. So I took the shoebox and I looked at the turf sample. The grass was really thin. The soil was kind of weird. And when I lifted it up, I saw this earthworm, and that's the picture I took that day. So this is October of, the little thing's over it, but it's 2017, I think. And I saw these worms, and that day, coincidentally, my friend, who's a very avid birder, had sent me an email that said there's a crazy snake worm from the, what's NPS, National, I don't remember. And we started talking about this. I started saying, has anyone seen these worms? And by the way, because I was trying to diagnose what was wrong, I found that the pH of the turf, this soil that this person brought in, was super high. And we basically started a discussion that fall on, what are these worms? Are they new? Has anyone seen them? Very few worms are native to New York. There's a few that are starting to work their way up, but very few are native. And that's because if you ever had a chance to study geology, we had the Ice Age, and the Laurentide ice sheet came way down multiple times through most of New York, except some of our nice agricultural area near Pennsylvania. And that eliminated the worms that were native. The worms that we know now came with colonists when they brought plants or when things came with soil. And so the earthworms that we know are they're introduced, but they have not become harmful. So they're considered beneficial, and that's why Darwin said worms are good. The jumping worms that we're concerned about were introduced from Asia, and they don't have natural predators, they cause harm, and they are a New York State DEC prohibited invasive species, in that you cannot knowingly transport or introduce them into the environment. And that's going to be key later when we talk about things like fishing bait or sharing plants. So you can't knowingly introduce them. They are an invasive prohibited. I don't think many other states have made them prohibited. I think one around the Great Lakes has, and I have forgotten which one. A lot of the work about the jumping worms initiated around the Great Lakes region. And I think that some of that is because there's a lot of concern, awareness about the forests, and a lot of awareness about fishing. And there was a tie made early on that where bait was dumped was where a lot of these worms were found around fishing areas and around riparian areas. So the first thing I want to go over is identification. And what I want to compare is the European night crawlers compared to the jumping worms. So as we saw in the figure a couple of slides ago, European night crawlers create deep vertical burrows. They're going to be near the surface when the weather is mild. They're going to be near the surface when there's a recent rain and the weather is mild. They don't display visible soil disruption, and I'll show that in a moment with the jumping worms. They have a slimy skin. When they're frightened, they exude a slime. So when you pick it up and you look at it, there's going to be bits of debris that are sticking to that worm. They're going to leave a slime on your skin. They have a band called a clitellum, and the clitellum normally is raised above the body. And it's normally not a continuous band. It's not always easy to tell if they're not adult, but their clitellum is raised. It's more of an inner tube. They move slowly. The night crawlers have just a couple of little hairs underneath their segments. And so when they move more like with an inchworm motion. They can turn over, they can curl up, but they're going to be moving more slowly like a worm. They don't display that visible soil disruption. As I said, you might see a little bit of castings or a little bit of soil where their burrow comes up where they go down, but you're not going to notice that unless you're really looking for it. And they're most active in spring and fall when the temperatures are mild. Jumping worms, by comparison, are in the top few inches of the soil. That's where they stay. The winter kills them, the cocoons overwinter, and they stay in the top couple of inches of soil. They have a shiny skin, and sometimes it almost looks iridescent when they're older. They don't exude that slime, and so, you know, if the soil's moist, it's going to stick to them, but in general, they're going to be more shiny and they're going to be smoother. The clitellum is even with the body and it's closer to the head, and I have a picture in a sec. And the deal is that they have these little hairs all the way around their body on every segment. And so they have the ability to move much more quickly. And when they're frightened, they tend to ball up and jump, which is thus their nickname. Okay, so they have a thrashing motion a lot more like a snake. Okay, their body segments aren't as noticeable, and the key thing is that as they
Hey, Joyce.
Yes.
Just to interrupt for a second, I'm sorry. If
Course.
you stop recording on your side, I want to
Yeah.
free up some of your bandwidth because a little bit of your vocals are getting fried right now just from
Okay.
bandwidth, and
Okay.
being able to, you might want to quickly review the jumping worm ID characteristics. I'm not sure. Maybe people could give me a thumbs up if that's okay, if other people's vocals were scattered, or maybe it was just mine. So if you could let us know in the chat if we should have them repeat, that would be good. Oh, okay. It's just me. I'm the worst.
It's just you.
I'm sorry.
So I'm gonna keep recording.
Thank you guys.
Cool. Thanks everybody.
Okay, fantastic.
Fantastic. Okay. So the ground beef castings are what is the initial thing that once you're out and about, those castings are what's going to catch your eye. And that's because the jumping worms are really effective at decomposing the carbons in those top couple of inches. So you'll see some pictures later, but if you have like mulch, like wood chip mulch, you're going to see these little balls of castings in the ground, in the lawn. I was walking in the lawn last summer and I thought, whoops, I just stepped on some dog poop, and I looked more closely and it was castings. So that's going to be the thing that is first going to catch your eye, are those castings. And the fact that these worms hatch early in the season and they grow, and there can be a couple of different hatchings, but they're really visible because they're full size by the time they get to late June, early July, until you have a really hard frost. Both of these worms are darkly pigmented, and both of them are large in the summertime. So this is one of the pictures that is often used that shows the clitellum of the nightcrawler compared to the jumping worm. I'm going to tell you that it's a combination of characteristics which are going to help you identify, but the clitellum is one of them. Okay, now let's see if this works, Ashley. So this is a video of jumping worms that I collected from a raised bed last autumn. So that was 41 that I got out of the raised bed, and this was a day later. And so you see how they are very active. Now, let me see if I can do this one. Oops. Yes. This is a European nightcrawler. This was last May. So the one on the right is a European nightcrawler in May, and it was underneath some weed cloth that we picked up. And that's the first example of the difference of these. Okay, it's not always easy. So I was trying to find even more information. And so correct identification has things like counting the setae per segment, and the earthworms that we have only have 8 per segment, and they're on the bottom, and the jumping worms have much more, and they're all the way around. I've got a good microscope, and I've not been able to do this because they're moving, all right? Here's a quote. Positive identification is based on external and internal characters, including counting of segments, male pores, spermathical pores, genital markings, spermathaceae, prostate glands, and intestinal. I have no idea what that is. Most people don't know how to do this. There is a key. The point is I'm going to urge you as citizen scientists to take photos and when and where you saw these. And there are experts that are watching the IMAP data and putting all the clues together, and if need be, getting more detail. But the scientists are going to identify them this way. Those of us that aren't scientists are going to use some more basic things. Okay. Last fall, I'll show you in a moment, we did a worm hunting here at our demonstration gardens because they're filled with jumping worms. And I sent this to a scientist at a university whose key focus is these jumping worms. And he said, well, the big one is almost certainly Metaphyra hilgendorfi. The smallest one probably is Amynthas tokiensis. And if you had Amynthas agrestis, it would kind of overlap with the two of them. So even a scientist can't necessarily tell them apart from each other all the time, but the point is that how they behave, where we find them in the top soil. I want you to be confident when you find the characteristics I'll remind you about to map them, and people that are more skilled will be able to determine the difference. Here's another one. These are my worms that I collected this spring, and I was all proud of myself because every time it was raining on my newly paved driveway, I was picking up worms. The dog was confused because why did we have to stop every morning to go get the paper and pick up worms? And I was collecting them because I have a research project going on right now with jumping worms. And I sent them to the same scientists and I was wrong. These aren't jumping worms. They were up because it was spring, because it was warm and it was cool, and they are immature, they're common, and I did not have jumping worms. So the point is it was April. The point is where the clitellum was. The scientist could look at that and say that this was not a jumping worm, and I missed out communicating with him later about these. I don't know what they are. So as we're identifying, we have to think about multiple things. The timing, it's going to be late June through hard frost. It's going to be the castings. The castings are described as overcooked ground beef. They're minerally. If you put them in your hand, it's just nothing but mineral and poop, decomposed stuff. It's not soil at all. It's castings. It's going to be the top couple of inches of soil because these worms don't make the burrows. It's going to be how they move. Then you're going to look at what their appearance is. And when you map it, you're going to have an expert review it because there are people that are looking at the entries into IMapInvasives. Okay. There is a good book, Earthworms of the Great Lakes. I have a copy here, and it also helps you understand some of the worms and how to identify them. So why are we caring about them? We're caring because they cause harm. They are introduced and they cause harm, and that's why they're invasive. The first understanding was really, like I said, around the Great Lakes with foresters. And in forests, they're so effectively consuming that duff, the leaves, the forest floor, that it's causing the floor to drop a little bit. You can start seeing the roots of trees in badly infested soil, which then the ephemerals aren't growing, and it's causing a lot of harm in the forests. I've not seen that much in our forests, but I honestly haven't been aggressively going out and looking. They can be certainly in meadows and in grasslands. I've not locally seen a lot of concern from agricultural enterprises. My guess is because most of the fields are tilled, that's disrupting that little layer, and so the worms aren't thriving there. Certainly, we have a concern with horticulture, and certainly the turf industry, like golf courses, are very concerned about this because they're so so eager to have really beautiful turf in a golf course, and that's not going to happen if everywhere you walk you've got these jumping worms that have destroyed the top couple of inches. So it can lead to the rapid decay of forest floor, organic mulches. I remember early on a person who, and I had a master gardener last year, they brought in yards and yards of mulch, and they brought in worms with the mulch, and they basically destroyed their ornamental planting because they had introduced worms. The worms produce these castings. The castings are really high pH, which is going to stop seeds from germinating. And so it's really loose. And so you have a lot of erosion, and you can have nutrient runoff, and that can cause harm to waterways. I was at the Cornell Botanical Gardens, I think 2 years ago, and there was a person that was planting a bunch of shrubs on a fairly good slope. And I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Well, it all eroded because we had jumping worms. And the shrub's roots then became too dry, and they died because they were shallowly rooted, and they didn't have good soil in which they could grow." Oh, they reproduce very rapidly, and they're parthenogenetic. They don't need to mate. So a female can lay hundreds of cocoons. Each cocoon can have 1 or 2 eggs. They can do it a couple times a year, and those cocoons then are able to survive very cold temperatures. You in the Adirondacks might get colder. It might be that you're not going to see these as much. That's why I'm very interested in what you are going to find if you proactively go out and look. The cocoons hatch at greater than 50 degrees air temperature, and they can survive to -40 Fahrenheit. So that's pretty amazing. The worms are killed when it gets cold, and the worms, University of Wisconsin has proven through research that sustained 104 degree or higher kills the worms in the cocoons. This is important. That is the protocol for compost that's made, industrial compost that's made with food scraps, because that's the temperature that's needed to ensure that there's no bacteria or other pathogens. So there is a protocol to sterilize compost that could be used just like with soil that would stop these from spreading. I don't know locally if there are soil sellers that do this, but it has been proven that it can be done. So the research that we're doing with our little project here, we bought topsoil, and we put it out on black weed cloth. We put it about 3 inches thick. We watered it, and we covered it with clear plastic, and we cooked the bejesus out of it, and it is sterile. It doesn't have any other organic material in it, but in any case. So the next thing is they're harmful, and how do they spread? They spread by people. They spread by people that are buying bait. It may be that the bait is contaminated with jumping worms. I don't know how well the bait industry is monitored, but they're not supposed to be sold, but they could be mixed in with other bait. They could be spread by people with cocoons, and that could be in soil, it could be in compost, it could be in plants that you buy, trees that you buy, it could be in your tires, your hiking boots, your garden tools. I have to show you something. This is a boot brush. Can you see that? That there's a Stop Invasives Play Clean Go builds these, and this is a really good boot brush. So when you are out hiking and you come back, you should be cleaning all the soil off of your boots or off of your tires, etc. They're estimated to be able to spread themselves 10 meters per year, but I've seen them floating down with water. We had quite a storm a couple of weeks ago. In the side of my driveway, it eroded with leaves, and when I looked, I could see the castings before the leaves, and when I pushed back the leaves, I found jumping worms. And as I said, it might be sold as fishing worms, and when people dump the bait or the bait packaging, that can be a problem. These are 2 pictures of the cocoons. This was midsummer. There's the castings, and these were freshly laid And this, one of the master gardeners found this in autumn. They've aged a little bit more, and there's a dime, so you can see how small they are compared to that dime. And as they age over the winter, they get darker brown. So go back to where we were. So this person came in with lawn, a bad lawn in November of 2017, and we started talking about it together, and we started understanding. As I said, Michigan, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, there are some really smart people doing research in Vermont and in Connecticut. And at that time in New York, there were only 4 reported sightings in IMapInvasives. There's a lot more now. And we as Cornell Cooperative Extensions often have plant sales in spring and in fall. And when we realized what was going on, we realized that we didn't want to knowingly spread these worms. So what we did here in Dutchess County is normally we have a huge plant sale every spring. It's our major fundraiser. It pays for half my salary. And what we always did was all our master gardeners dug their perennials, and we potted them up and we sold them because they were our favorites and they're things that we loved. And we realized that that could be spreading these worms. So what we did instead is we purchased plugs. We made sure that they were grown in sterile conditions, not in the ground. And it added about $1 for every plant, but we decided that was okay. And we built a temporary hoop house where we raised these before our plant sale in May. And we did a lot of education. Here's our hoop house with the sides down with snow, and there's water in the kitty litter buckets, and there's a rope thrown over the top so that when we have windstorms or hail, well, we didn't have hailstorms, that's you, Emily, but when we had windstorms, it held down the poly, and in the daytime we roll it up, and there's our perennials that were growing there. We had to put out traps for a vole. We opened the door at the end and the beginning of the day, and we grew everything to make sure we weren't spreading worms. We did have a small error one day when it snowed because the ash tree dumped all of the snow and it collapsed to the hoop house, but Bob was there and he's kind of short. So we just sent Bob in and he popped everything back up and we were okay. So that was when we started with the education, and we really wanted to have people understand that these were a problem. Now, as we talked with people, I started hearing, especially old timer, especially fishermen saying, I've seen those before. And I started listening and I started asking questions. And the more scientists are looking into this, the more we think that these might go back to the 1940s. And maybe they've been here and we weren't looking. Maybe they spread, but the more we educate people, the more we're getting input on where they are. And that's why I want you guys to be doing stuff too. At the Dutchess County Fair, we have a Ask the Master Gardeners where we answer questions it would have been today. It got canceled for the first time in 150 years. Anyhow, it would have, and we also have a compost exhibit on how to compost. So one of the master gardeners put a little sign together, and then someone else came with a little remotely controlled car, and we're up on Livestock Hill, and I think people thought we were going to have circus worms because we said, have you heard about jumping worms? And we say, they live in the topmost, they decompose organic matter, they leave grainy soil, they grow and reproduce, and they spread by cocoons. And people stop, and we had samples because I have a DEC permit, so I was able to bring them, and people handled them and people looked at them, and we had hand sanitizer afterwards. And what I did for Dutchess County, and if anyone has an organization that wants to do this, I'll send you this flyer. I put together a flyer and I said, map these in IMAP, or if you don't want to deal with it, send me a picture. Send me a photograph of the worm, of something next to it so we get the size. Tell me where you found it. Tell me when you found it. And I went into IMapInvasives and I mapped things on people's behalf, because I can't expect a normal fairgoer to get snazzy about understanding how to map things for invasives, but I can give them, everyone's got one of these things in their pocket. So we had a lot of people send us photographs and I was able to map them. So we're getting more information. And I just explained that we needed data to help researchers and scientists understand where these are. So they cause harm, and right now there are very few control options. You can bring them to the surface and you can hand pick them. And basically you look for the castings. Like I said, that's the first thing you're gonna start training your eyes to see. You get about 1/3 cup of ground mustard in a gallon of water and you pour it. And what it does is it irritates their skin. It doesn't kill them. If you get salamanders, you can rinse them off and put them back. If you don't want to deal with killing them, you can look at them, you can count them, you can photograph them, you can rinse them off, and you can put them back. For us, we hand pick them and we put them in a bag and we solarize them, and when they're dead, we throw them in the garbage. You can control the worms by solarizing the soil. And this is what I described for our research project. It is most effective when you cover it with clear plastic. And I have a reference from someone that did research, if anyone doubts me. And it is most effective when it's wet. And when I went out, when we were solarizing it, I was hitting 130 degrees. And I could see the steam underneath. So it really, really did build up the heat. We anchored the edges. The advice says leave it in place for 4 to 6 weeks. That stuff was solarized within a week, in my opinion. But if you would, for example, had raised beds that you wanted to make sure that they were free of worms, you could do this. It also harms any other beneficial insects. So you've got dirt, you don't have soil. When you're done with this, you have dirt. And you would want to then amend it with good compost or whatever. There are very few pesticides that are available for worms. And if you're trained about pesticide laws, especially in New York, the label is the law. And you can't buy anything unless it's labeled for where and what. So it would have to be for your lawn or for your garden, and it would have to be specific to Amynthas, agrestis, etc. There anecdotally was a fertilizer which has saponins, which was used by the turf industry, such as golf courses, which was used to control worms in turf, and it kills all the invertebrates, but it wasn't labeled for jumping worms. And last summer, I was advised that the maker of it had taken it off the market because they didn't want the EPA and the New York DEC to get them in trouble for something that was being sold without the proper pesticide, place, and pest. So at this point, there are researchers that are looking for control options, but we don't have anything in New York, and I don't think there's anything in any other states either. So back to my garden. Now I'm a year later, and I'm digging dahlias, and yes, it's November, and if you're a gardener, you know it was late. It should have been earlier. I'm always running late, and I'm digging tubers, and I look down and I think, oh, rats. Here's a rat. Here's a jumping worm. And I got out my pencil and I took a picture, and then I picked it up and I looked and I thought, oh gosh, here it is coming out of here. And within a minute, you guys, I had a handful of jumping worms. This is my ornamental garden. It's where I've had perennials for 30 years. The soil is shot now between the heat and the drought this year. I don't have a whole lot that's growing, but I had a lot of jumping worms in this. And then this was, I showed you this video earlier. This was a raised bed where I was growing raspberries, and it's totally infected. When I took those dahlia tubers out in spring to replant them, they were husks. And I can only imagine that I had missed some worms that had overwintered with these in the basement, which is 50, and they ate everything they could before they died. So it destroyed the storage tubers. And this was just one more photo I wanted to show again that says the castings is what your eye is really going to get good at looking for. These are our demonstration gardens in front of our building. And this was last August. And this is a beautiful photograph, you know, with the bench, and I was using it for our newsletter. And these are shadows, but these are worm castings. And this is the sidewalk, and this is picking up a lobelia, I think, and that's all worm castings. So we decided to go worm hunting. And Thursday we're going to worm hunt too. We're going to do this again. But we got together with lots of master gardeners, and we laid out grids of 1/2 meter square. And we made a little map, and we had high, medium, low on the amount of castings. And we poured 1/3 cup per gallon of ground mustard water, and we counted worms. And we did this, and one of the experts who's from Yale and now down in New York City, as an example, around this rock were a lot of castings, but this was October. It was probably a little late to be looking for them. We didn't find many worms there because they had already depleted all of the material. Whoops, what am I doing? I hit a button. There we go. And what we found instead was next door is where we found even more. So they had moved from where they had depleted all the nutrients they wanted, and they had gone to new soil. So this is an example that was fresh wood chips from spring, and that was the first 10 minutes, and we counted them and we dumped them in a bucket, and about 5 minutes later someone said, wait a minute, there's more. And that's the same spot, and we had another huge handful. So that's a takeaway container atop, and it was disgusting, but we went worm hunting. And this is where I found the, yes.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, sorry.
And this is where I found the photo that I sent to the scientist, and we found out we had 2 species. Go ahead, Emily.
So that's actually a great segue. I want to interrupt you. We have a lot of awesome questions that I can't wait to talk about at the end. But this one person is asking, will the mustard solution drive all species of worms to the surface?
Yes, it will. It will, all species of worm, it will drive to the surface. And so what scientists are doing is they're picking out the invasives, and I don't think they usually coexist. And also this is going into the top few inches. And also this was October where it was cooler, but if you were doing it where it was warmer, the European earthworms are in much lower burrows. So yes, it brings everything to the surface as deeply as it soaks. And so you would want to be thinking about what you could be destroying if you had non-Asian invasives.
And then just getting back, you know, it's so interesting of all these different categorizations of, you know, what species are invasive versus introduced. It's really, and going back to the very first slides, none of these worms are from North America. They're all carved away by the ice sheets. Yep. And so what's the impact? Think about that with all types of invasive species. If there's no negative impact, it's not something we're going to be, you know, targeting. And so getting into the next portion of that, of the talk about, you know, activating as citizen scientists and mapping, we're targeting these because of their intense impacts on forest ecosystems, on agriculture, on economic stability. So thank you so much, Joyce. I'll stop now.
Yep, absolutely. And that's why the definition in North America, and I think worldwide, is introduced and causes harm. So the harm that this is causing is it's destroying the top few inches of the soil, which is of a special concern in our woodlands, which can be of concern in our ornamental gardens, which is of concern with manicured turf. And I'm not sure yet of the concern in an agricultural point of view, but they are introduced and they cause harm.
Oh, one more quick question. And this is helpful because all the worms are coming to the surface. Does Seek iNaturalist recognize jumping worms for ID?
I know that iNaturalist does, and it was added last summer. And so I know, I don't use iNaturalist and Seek, but yes. And jumping worms were added by DEC a couple of years ago. And I'll make the point now, and I think I'll make it again, but I'm going to urge you guys to use IMapInvasives because that has a real-time data communication between the experts and species of special concern. iNaturalist findings in Lower Hudson Prism, and I think it's New York wide, but I'm not sure, but iNaturalist sightings are bulk uploaded at some point later in the season or after the season. So if you report with iNaturalist, it will get into IMAP, but it may not be in as real time. These are just another reiteration of the castings. That is a ruler, and I think the castings are 3 inches deep there. It's just nothing. It's just castings. It's not soil. It's mineral, high pH castings. And when you look, I think that's Pat's hand, the roots of that that time there were pretty much gone because they were nibbling on the roots while they were digesting the rest of the organic material. And this is from, I think, University of Wisconsin. I should put the source of that. And it shows that there's different sizes, but you can see these are the cocoons. They're dark later in the season. And I would describe that as kind of the size of a peppercorn. I've not gone cocoon hunting. The way you do it is you set up a sieve and you try and sieve out everything until you get just the cocoons that are left. And I've not tried to do that yet. I've just been counting worms. So what you can do, you can educate yourself. You can educate others. That's why we're here today. You can proactively look for them. You can make sure that you're not moving them. Like I said, in terms of plant sales, pretty much the CCEs are not sharing plants. We're doing some research to prove that washing the roots can take the cocoons off without harming the plants. But don't move soil. Clean your vehicles, your ATVs, your equipment. Don't move soil. Don't move the cocoons. I have talked with a person in Ag and Markets, and I believe that in our area in New York, starting last year, they started being much more proactive on educating commercial landscape firms, and I hope that they will start now also inspecting. I've heard stories of people finding jumping worms in commercial landscape sellers, and I urge that they tell the seller and have the seller tell me so I can help them understand what worms look like and how to avoid them. If you're trading compost, if you're buying and selling, and if you're concerned about introducing it, see if you can find material that's been sterilized. Or if you're bringing it in, watch it like a hawk to see if you see worms and try and then remove them. If you've got bait, if you're a fisher person, bait and bait packaging could be harboring the worms inadvertently, the worms deliberately, the cocoons inadvertently. Don't give the worms to the soil because all worms are good because Darwin said so. So first look for piles of castings. I was down by the mailbox and there was a tree that had been cut down, and I looked carefully and I moved the leaves aside, and that stump was just surrounded with castings because they had started working on the edges of the dead bark. When I stepped in the lawn and it was spongy, I looked and I found castings. When you are in the woods, if it looks like the naturally planted trees that know at what level to plant themselves, if it looks like the roots are starting to be exposed, look around. You might see that, you might find castings. Then as you find them, the behavior is going to be snake-like. They're going to be in the top few inches of soil. They're going to be largest from late summer until a hard frost. It's going to be when they're hot. The European earthworms are going to go down deep in the ground when it's too warm. They're not going to be up in those front inches. They're going to be shiny. Sometimes they're iridescent. Only a few times I've seen them when they're iridescent. One of the descriptions is that sometimes when they're frightened, they cast half their tail off. And I kept saying, I've never seen that. And last year I saw it. It drops half its tail, I guess, if a bird got it or something. The clitellum, that band, is very even and continuous as opposed to puffy with a little bit of a gap on the underside. And when you scout for and find, I'd like you to use IMapInvasives. We would like you to have both presence and absence. If you're in an area, like if you're at a trailhead, right? That's where a lot of invasives are first found. If you're at a trailhead, look around. And if you don't see castings and you push away the leaves and you don't see castings and you don't see worms, please report that absence. And obviously, if you have the presence. And iNaturalist does accepts the reports. As I said, we get the data a little later. This is a report of jumping worms from the lower Hudson, okay? This is the Catskills, so that's crisp. The lower Hudson region goes down pretty much to the Bronx. And this is where jumping worms have been reported as of last week. More people are reporting them. Oops. Next. This is your APIP. And there's only a few that have been reported. It's kind of on the edges, but I'd really like it if you are in APIP or whatever area you are to go ahead and start reporting these. And I'll swap slides in just a second. We'll talk about IMAP, but this is what is currently reported. So Emily sent this out before she lost power. And so there are resources that are available, and that's in the handout that was given to you. And why don't you ask any other questions, Emily, while I swap to the next deck, okay?
Yeah, that would be great. So a couple that I know I can answer with confidence is, so we answered the boot brush question. It's a really simple tool that is literally a horse hoof brush. You can carry it around while you're hiking. They're super easy to find at a farm feed store. If you're in a even suburban area, you'll probably be able to find a farm and feed store in your region. And these are materials that I know I'm actually new to APIP, and this is something we used to be able to give out, but we haven't been able to interact with other humans for a little bit. So I can help you find boot brushes in your area. Super simple and important. One question, so just to reiterate, we really want to advertise this workshop to anglers. These worms can be sold and used as bait, especially when people are growing their own bait and selling it. So please be aware of identifying factors if you're using worms as bait, as live bait. If someone's selling it, it's easy to call. I'll send out information for DEC and who to call just to inform those people not to be selling them. They're not going to get in trouble or anything, but we want to make sure that these worms aren't being spread. It's in that store owner's best interest as well. One other question I saw here that's really, really key is, someone asked if they're only in the first 2 inches of soil, why are roots and bulbs being impacted? What's really important about that depth is, believe it or not, even the biggest tree you've ever interacted with, the vast majority of their roots are in the top 2 inches of soil. Some larger trees have big tap roots, but that's where trees are getting their organic matter for nutrients, where they're getting oxygen, where they're, where they're getting their CO2 and they're releasing oxygen at different times of the day. It's where a lot of respiration occurs. The top 2 inches of soil is where the vast majority of life on Earth exists in terms of bacteria and fungi. So the 2 inches, it seems small, but that's where the roots and bulbs are, or rhizomes.
Yep. And loamier soil, they're going to be able to go deeper.
Yes. And then one last question before I'm going to just check these off. That I'll answer, because I love soil and I love worms. It's a lot of my background too, is since warmer temperatures, you know, above 100 degrees are able to break down cocoons. Does that mean that in southern parts of the United States, these worms are not entering into? So my answer for that is soil is a really incredible physical structure and living ecosystem where it does tend to stay a lot cooler than your ambient temperatures. And that's how a lot of plants do stay alive and how soil retains its moisture in these really intense hot times of the year. And so even though it's 110 outside, and that can happen for sure in the city during the most miserable weeks of summer, that doesn't mean that the soil is that temperature. And that person smartly noted, do worms go deeper? Yes, they do. So worms can travel up and down in order to find the temperature that helps, you know, that is best for them to maintain homeostasis. Although they're not homeos, so they're still maintaining stasis. They're staying alive. And we'll answer, these are the best questions ever. So we're going to answer all of them at the end.
Yep. And I'm watching time. We're okay on time. I don't know if people could do yes, no. Do you have how many people, maybe they can do a thumbs up, thumbs down, are familiar with IMapInvasives? I don't know how to look at this.
Thank you for using the chat. Feel free to use the chat if you can't use the thumbs up.
Because what I'd like to do is first off tell you that IMapInvasives has really good education on their website, and these slides are exactly their slides. So I would like to kind of net it out so that we can get back to the questions and answers. So if you feel that I'm rushing, do know that this information with videos and everything else is all available. And I can assure you, in the last few years, with the newer release, this mobile app has become really, really easy to use. And so I will at times show you some of this as I go. So there are, let me just do from the beginning. Okay, now do you see the, oops, where am I? Okay, you see the full screen, Emily?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So IMapInvasives is a whole series. It's a mobile app and it's a database, and there's all sorts of tools, GIS-based, really cool stuff that scientists can use to really analyze the data. I'm not going to get into any of that today. I'm going to ask you as individuals to understand how simple it is for you to use the mobile app to report stuff. Okay? There are people that are managing invasives that have lots more capability to track and report. There's amazing layers. If you are data driven, you can learn all sorts of information from the database itself. And there is the capability for specific things like beech leaf disease, like spotted lanternfly, that when you as a citizen science report it, there are flags that go immediately to key people so that they know what's going on and they can confirm and react to early detection of something that's really important and new, okay? The presence and the whole data types, we're basically gonna do points. If you want to learn more about making a whole location, like maybe you spend time looking in a specific park or a specific area where you like to hike, there are ways that you can describe the whole area. I'm not going to get into that. You would do that a little bit more using the desktop-based tools. But the point is that you can do not detect it as well as presence and absence, okay? North America is, all of North America is covered by IMapInvasives. We're in New York, which is managed by the New York Natural Heritage, what's the P? I forget. And then, say again?
Program,
probably. And then there are organizations, so like what I do is I report stuff through Lower Hudson Prism, but I'm also part of the CCE project. So everyone, anywhere, you, as soon as you set up an ID, you can map what you see. You can enter, view, export, you can do presence and absence, and you can look at what may have been used to treat an area, but until you have more training and more active participation, you're not going to be able to enter basic treatments. But you can, if you're part of a gardening club or something like that, you can very well set up your own projects. Again, I'm not going to get into that today. And we in New York, the DEC is very involved, the prisms are very involved, and that's what we use. So the mobile app is this thing that's going to be on your phone. You can store everything into the cloud. It then gets showed up into this database, and there's a lot of tools that you can use when you get savvy about looking at reports. So, and if you took the time to do it beforehand, or it's simple to do, I've downloaded IMapInvasives, and this morning I did a fake report, and I can show you a couple of things that you can do. You will go into IMapInvasives.org. You will pick New York as your jurisdiction, and you create an account, and then you receive an email and you activate it. And what that lets you do at that website is you can keep zooming in and zoom and zoom and zoom. And what I did to make that worm report was I filtered on worms, and then I zoomed into the Adirondacks, and I was able to show you that with just a screenshot. That's all I'm going to get into in terms of the data analysis today. I want you guys to report. So you would log in. You can look at the different functions on the database, but what you will do, what I want you to do is understand how to use the mobile app. So on the mobile app, in the top corner, there's a little button, and whoops, I'm ahead of myself. Oops, I went the wrong direction. There we go. So you can go to the little menu on the top. You can set your preferences. And I use a lot of the defaults. I mean, I had to type in New York, and I had to type in my email and password, and then retrieve these lists to make sure that you've got the most up-to-date lists, like when they updated it for beech leaf disease as an example. And then you just keep scrolling down, okay? So this often, you need to know that you're gonna have to keep scrolling until you get all the way down to the save. So here in New York, you'd set that in. I made my own custom list. I use common names because I don't always remember the scientific, and I made my own custom list, which is pretty easy to do. If I can do that here, customize the species list. You basically just pick the ones you want and keep scrolling down and pick the ones you want, and then at the end you save, okay? Okay. I use the default on the road. I let it fill in the GPS just fine for me. I go ahead and save it, let it save on my phone. And I think you said, Emily, that that you're not using a lot of projects. I think my default organization is Lower Hudson Prism, and then my default organization is Cornell Cooperative. You would need to work with the coordinator for your area to figure out what your options are.
So just as a note about that, in the email, the reminder I sent last night or yesterday afternoon, letting people know, the different steps and links to download this and get your account set up. Every different prism is different. Every different prism is different. And so our prism, the way we use this and the way we use it with our volunteers and citizen scientists out in the field is we don't ask for you guys to request access like for an organization. There is an app, there is an option for that, but it's not necessary. That's just for internal staff because we're not able to share, privacy information or addresses or locations where we're finding invasives. in case we were treating something, which is also added into this whole database of mapping and GIS that we use for really setting our goals and our work plans for the year. But if you were to, we would love it if you, when you made an account, to choose a project. And so I have it in my notes here, but I'll send out that project name again in the follow-up resources. I have a long list of resources I'm going to send you all. And so I'll send you the project name, but don't worry about the organization if you're in the APIP area, if that makes sense. It'll make sense when you open up the app and register.
Yep.
And we have recorded webinars from earlier this summer that go through all, you know, every step of how to use IMAP, how to download it, how to use the desktop version, how to use the mobile version. And this is just a really amazing research tool that is, you know, run and operated by researchers. It's not a private enterprise or anything like that. So they've worked really hard to make it easy to use and user-friendly, and it's all free. And you don't even have to use data. You can upload your findings when you're back home.
Yep. So when you set up the preference, and a lot of times when you're making a observation, always remember to go down to the end and say save. Sometimes I get lost on my page and I think, why can't I do anything? And I have to go down to the end. So adding an observation is really simple. Push the button. Push the button. There we go. And you take a picture. And you can either retake it or use the photo. So I'm going to use the photo. Okay. You can upload it from all sorts of places too. Now, I do happen to have a custom list, but so I can either say select detected or not, and then I can go in with my custom list. I just have a couple of things. And so when I want to select it, I select jumping worms. So each time so there and then done. And you fill in the other things. Okay. So I said detected, the date is automatically filled in, the place is automatically filled in. There I am. Sometimes if it can't find your GPS, you might have turned it off. I don't need to zoom in at all. I know where I am. It shows me my GPS, and so I know that it is on. And for me, I have Lower Hudson Prism, and it's all filled in. And I don't have any, oh, it's time searched. I spent 1 minute. Done. And I don't put in any comments. I can just say test. Done. And I go down and I say save. And
can I add two things?
Yep.
If you go back one slide. So remember, don't worry about organization. Leave that blank. It can be optional. I'll send you the project name if you're in our Prism area. The time searched is really key, especially if you're doing a non-detect, because remember that lack of jumping worms is also something that's super, super important when we're managing our area. So this is all information that's going to inform real life land management. For that customized species list, in order to help you with setting up your account, literally wade through all of the potential animals and plants that could possibly go into your custom list. I'm gonna email out a list of top tier species that APIP cares about. So for instance, I mean, for New York, there might be species on there that are island because they're in saltwater ecosystems. We don't have that up in the Adirondacks, the same way that Long Island doesn't have high altitude alpine ecosystems. So I'm going to send you out and remember, you know, it's not the fanciest app, but it's used for real life research. So this is becoming a real citizen scientists. And if you're trying to up your steps goal for the day, or you got really into the Pokemon Go craze from 2 years ago, which was really fun, I loved it. Or you just want an activity when you're out on a walk with a stroller or your dog. This is something you can be doing that can save forests, which is amazing.
And then be sure that you've got a good photo. I mean, this one, it's hard to see because it's so moist. It's hard to see what that is. This one, it's hard to see how big it is. This one, at least you've got some context and you've got the key information here in terms of the segments, the clitellum, etc. And then, so these are not great photos. And then when you're done and when you're home or you're somewhere where you've got good connectivity, then you can go ahead and choose one and go back to menu, and upload selected. And I want to do it because it was fake species and they know to delete it. And then it goes ahead and uploads. So it's a very straightforward, it's fast now. It's not using data. Earlier tools were just kind of killing our phones when we were out there. Do customize the list because it makes it a lot easier for you to select. And it's a good reminder on what you're looking for. That's as far as I'm going to go, Emily. I was going to, if I had time, talk about Tree of Heaven and Spotted Lanternfly, but I would rather we go back and answer any questions. So I'll let you pick questions now, okay?
Okay, so we have amazing questions and I'm glad we're making time for it. Here's our first question, which is, why are there no predators? It seems like they would be easy for birds to catch. And I have a couple ideas, but I want you to go ahead.
And with all the talking at the Dutchess County Fair, you get strangers bragging to strangers. And I started asking people if chickens eat them. And they said no. And then someone said, well, if one chicken really thinks the other one's going to get it, they might. And then someone said, well, my ducks eat them. I think they move strangely. I don't know that. I'm not a scientist. But often when we have introduced species, they cause harm because their native predators didn't move with them.
Yeah, so I was thinking about movement as well. If you saw that video, and I'll send out links to the videos again, they move really fast. It's not anything like any worm any of you have ever seen, or any bird that has ever seen on our continent. So the movement, they're hard to catch. They also drop their tails, not unlike lizards, like Joyce mentioned, which is absolutely not common for most earthworms. Earthworms, as we know, can often be cut in half, and the head part can grow a new tail, but they don't just drop it as a defense mechanism. I would also say that a common a trend with a lot of invasive plants and animals is that their nutritional value is not like that of other organisms that you say a browsing animal or a bird would go look for. So if they're getting eaten, they might not have the same nutritional value. Great.
And they're reproducing parthenogenetically. I actually said that word. So they're reproducing also very quickly. And so it may be that if there are predators that have found them, they may not be keeping up with how quickly they're reproducing. I've not seen research on it, so my answer was anecdotal.
It's an emerging field. It's an emerging species. It's emerging research. So yes, so that brings us to another question, which has to do with another type of worm that I'm quite familiar with. Where did my question go? Oh, here we go. So why are jumping worms bad for gardening and soil quality when red wigglers are used in vermicomposting, and that's been really beneficial to gardeners?
Go ahead, but I think the net is their size, and the jumping worms are very, very effective in consuming and in decomposing, especially carbons, where the red wigglers are much more well behaved. They reproduce much more slowly, and they're much more modest consumers of browns and greens, decomposers.
I would agree with that, especially, and this connects to another question we had about, you know, them being voracious decomposers and impacting forest habitats. The temperature range I know of red wiggler worms is very narrow. They're very easily killed by really warm temperatures and really cold temperatures. So even if the soil is cool, they're not the best at living out in the wild. And so that's something that helps, especially depending on where they're coming, or if they're coming this far north, which I don't think red wigglers would ever survive our cold, even if the cocoons can tolerate a lot.
And in fact, that's why the DEC has not prohibited them, and that's why you can legally and confidently buy vermiculture worms online from another state, and they can be transported.
And then and that's absolutely correct. And so getting back to that, why is it bad for gardening? Actually, using too much vermicompost, depending on your specific gardening activity, is also not good for gardening. So Joyce mentioned that seed germination is drastically impacted by that high acidic, that high level of acidity, and then the pH is really far off for seed germination. And vermicompost can do the same thing. It's also really, really high in nutrient value. And so a lot of seed starting mix, when you buy it, it's actually just coconut coir and perlite. It has no nutrients. A lot of seeds have everything they need already, and they just need a structure to jump out into, and their roots are really, really sensitive. So having too much vermicompost in your seed starting mix can also be challenging. Adult plants really want all that nutrients, but starting seeds is also a challenge. I could go on and on. It's a dangerous subject.
I see a question from early on. Someone said a year ago in an article in Natural Histories that night crawlers can cause problems in northern forests. Yeah, the worms as worms move into places that were worm-free. I think there was things in the news last year that maybe it was Canada, but it was a further north area. When worms are moving into an area that was worm-free, there are impacts, and they're not always positive. Remember, the European earthworms were introduced also. The difference is that these are so voracious and reproduce so quickly and are really in those top couple of inches of the soil. What did you find next, Emily? I'm just looking through it.
Oh, so that actually helps with the next question regarding the spread of, let's do this as a two-parter, the spread of these types of worms across the state. Because all of these worms have been spread by people to our area. So firstly, how far spread across New York State are they? Including, there's a specific question about the Lisma prism, so Long Island.
Okay. So I think the answer is we don't know yet, because at least in the university system, the PRISM system, and the extension system, we're talking 4 years that we've even raised our hand and said, what are these and where are these? Anecdotally this year, I know that they're very active in Western New York. I know that, oh gosh, I mean, throughout lower New York, they've been reported. I don't have an answer for Lisma, but I did want to add that this year in the lower Hudson, it's been so dry and it's been so hot that that's why we're going to go worm hunting Thursday here, because I've seen very few. And I've pulled the master gardeners and they've seen very few. So we don't know yet what the effect is of weather and the weather trends and the temperature and the moisture. But throughout New York, I think now that people are looking, we're finding more. And that's why I'm so interested in what you find in the north.
that's a great question too. If, you know, we're working to lay the groundwork of, you know, what we teach people about today is going to be even more applicable to 5, 7 years from now, right? Of what is the temperature in the Adirondacks going to be 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 7, 10 years from now, and how does that introduce new species and entire communities of plants and animals, from native, invasive, introduced, all alike, and people too, to these new habitats as climate is changing. And so how can we be prepared and knowledgeable and you know, ready to be good stewards in a changing climate? Which has a really great question. Robin just typed, what do you, and Joyce, you know, please wax poetic on this for a minute, but because you have far more experience than anyone I've met. But what do you think about the future of this species? Can it be eradicated or controlled? And what kind of controls do you think would work in the long run? And this is a work in progress, so.
I don't think we know. There's certainly researchers that are looking at control options based on saponins. And I'm not a chemist, but it's something that irritates the mucous membrane and can kill the invertebrate, but it would be any worms. And so that's not cool. I don't know. I think that until we get an understanding of how widespread they are, and until we get an understanding of temperature, climate, humidity, weather cycles, maybe we're seeing a lot because we had weird weather for a couple of years, and it might be 5 years from now and people say, what's the fuss? I don't know. I think we don't have enough data, and I don't think we have a knowledge yet on what options could be used and when they should be used. So reporting and not spreading is what I'm blinders on. Are they widespread?
Just a comment. It's now 11:30, so this is an amazing conversation, and we still have 50 people on the line. I don't know, Joyce, if you have to go worm hunting right now,
Until
or
Thursday.
if you have some more time to stick along.
Sure.
And we'll keep the discussion going, because this is vibrant right now. I'm happy to stay.
Yep.
If folks need to drop off, I totally understand. But if some folks want to stay, and we'll keep discussing, because more amazing questions keep coming through. And so I'll let you decide though, Joyce, if you have to go.
That's fine. That's fine. Let's stay.
Okay, great. So I think you were going to touch on a question that got popped in there.
I forgot what it was then. Oh, so how widespread are they globally? I don't remember. I have a friend in Australia that sent me a video of someone, no, it was a master gardener here, sent me a video of someone from Australia teaching culture, and in the background you could see jumping worms in the compost. So I don't know. I don't know who's watching or who's checking. I don't know how widespread they are.
That is a good question. I'd like to learn more about what their natural predators are in their, you know, where they've originated from and evolved. So here's two questions. One was typed in earlier and one was just typed in here about, you know, DIY controls. So the first question was, someone makes their own compost tea at home. In your experience, has compost tea, like the process of making it, if worms are in the compost that they're beginning the process with, has that process killed the worms, or has it, you know, had an impact with application?
I don't know. You know, I know people make compost tea. Well, sometimes that's the way that they deal with the results from vermicomposting, but I don't know. I teach how to, and I haven't gathered data on the uses. Don't know.
That's okay. I
do know that they've been told they can coexist in water just fine.
Okay. One question has to do, and I kind of had this thought also when you were talking about solarizing your garden plot because I thought, oh, this could have a cascade of positive impacts on weed seeds that are in the soil bank of your garden as well. And out west, I'm from New York, but I moved up to the Adirondacks from Oregon, and this is a common use. Our garden tool is using a handheld blowtorch for seed or to kill the soil seed bank and invasives in a garden plot. But I know that in New York, I know in the Adirondacks you need permits for burning. So have you ever used a handheld blowtorch for worm control, Joyce?
I have not. And the first question I'd ask is how deeply it penetrates the soil. And if you've got loamy soil, it's probably more. If you've got packed, condensed, and then even if you successfully killed all the worms and all the cocoons and you stopped and you had a physical barrier, I mean, maybe you could do it in a raised bed, try not to burn the wood in the raised bed, but unless you have a physical barrier, things could migrate back in. And if all you have now is castings, what you have is dead and high pH.
Mm-hmm. And before using, having pyroculture in your system, I would recommend reaching out to your local fire department and seeing if that's permissible.
Please do not burn down.
Please be careful. Though people are learning, contemporary ecologists are learning more and more that there's a lot about North American ecosystems and this relationship to small, intermittent, controlled burns that can be really beneficial. But I would reach out to your local cooperative extension for advice and check in with your fire department as well. There are just so many good questions. So
I think what
harmful effects. Oh, go ahead, Joyce.
Yeah, I think so. At this point, I think that there's good resources. Emily, you've got, your folks from APIP know how to get a hold of you. If anyone wants to get a hold of me, Joyce Tomaselli, go to CCEDC, or I'm JDT225@cornell.edu. And again, if anyone wants that brochure to locally say, we will help map, give me a call, I'll give you the source, you can put your name in and I'll tell you how I did it. I basically looked up addresses, did a GPS, and then entered it and said, I'm entering this on behalf of this person at this address, and it helped us gather good data.
Yes, so, we have so many more questions that I don't know if we will be able to answer all of them, and they're very specific. So please reach out to us with very specific questions. So I'm going to send you a plethora of follow-up materials. I'm going to resend the PowerPoints as a PDF for everybody. I'm going to send you all detailed information and links to recorded trainings we've done already on how to use IMap and how to get it on your phone. It's really fun to use, and it's important. It makes a huge difference. I'm going to send you resources on jumping worms, so the pamphlet that Joyce discussed, but also a number of other ones that she put in her PowerPoint. And then, I could send you, if you have questions about where to get a boot brush, which also might be a good thing to have in the photo, because I know there's been a lot of discussion about rulers and multi-tools and what to use to not touch the worms. You can use your little boot brush because they're all pretty standard size, because we're the ones who look at those photos. So please, having a reference tool is really important, but using a boot brush is really key. So I'm also going to send you, oh, that's a good Jimmy Carter reference. That's a good one, in the chat. So I'm also going to send follow-up information for 2 upcoming workshops we have in September. So when you're out leaf peeping and your friends want to go on a hike to go, get a good pumpkin and enjoy the fall colors up in the Adirondacks, how can you be an excellent steward as a hiker or potentially as a biker? Because we talked about so much coming on your shoes, including worm eggs, but seeds and things that are really dropping tons of seeds in the fall that we're going to pick up while we're trying to go enjoy the outdoors. But we'll also talk in this upcoming workshop about how to be on the lookout for 2 other invertebrates that are forest pests. So how can you see the impacts of emerald ash borer on the landscape? And how can you be prepared to look for hemlock woody adelgid? And those will even feed into workshops that we're already planning for the early spring. And by early spring, I mean February, early March, which is a fun time to go snowshoeing and look for invasive forest pests in the Adirondacks. So I'll send you a lot of follow-up information and Joyce's contact information as well as my own. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart. Joyce, you're an excellent speaker. Our entire chat has been about how awesome Joyce is.
Thank you.
And thank you all for rolling with the punches for our sudden electrical outages. And now the sun, it's like a Disney movie. It's like sunny and cute little clouds, and there's a deer literally outside my window and the power's on. So thank you all. And thank you for our local experts too, who are you know, Frank, you answered a lot of great questions about becoming an IMAP specialist and an excellent citizen scientist. So thank you everybody. And look forward to seeing you at our September 16th and 22nd workshop. So also, if you know any enthusiastic duck hunters, we're going to have a prevent the spread of invasive species while you're duck hunting this fall.
Cool.
Okay. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a wonderful
Happy
day.
Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday. Is it only Tuesday?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I thought it was Saturday. All right. Have a good one.
Thank you.